Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler. Heads up that due to COVID-19, this interview was recorded remotely. It might not be the same quality as if recorded in a studio. Pianist Craig Taborn's new recording, Shadow Plays, on ECM was recorded in 2020 in Vienna while on a solo piano tour in Europe, just as the pandemic was blowing up. In this episode of Liner Notes, Craig reflects on the process of improvisation, as well as recounting the uncertainty that surrounded getting back home, as well as his transition to life in the shutdown. Craig, good morning. You have a new record on ECM called Shadow Plays, is it out now or is it coming out soon?
It's out. I think it came out a week or two ago. Official street date was
All right.
October 10th or 8th. I forget now, but it's been out for about a week at least.
Great record, thoroughly enjoyed it. Going back to March of the previous year in interviewing different musicians, everyone has a pandemic story, and one can't help but notice that this was recorded March 2nd of 20. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because the episode that's coming out next is, I interviewed Tony Malaby, and he has a new record with Ben Monder and Tom Rainey that was recorded on the 3rd.
Oh, wow.
Live at the 55 bar, right before the shutdown. So tell us about where you were and, the shutdown happened immediately after that. Were you scrambling to get back home?
I was. I was on a tour in Europe, and things were a lot of the gigs were falling away. The tour was sort of crumbling in front of me. I think the day before that recording, actually, which was in Vienna, I was supposed to play in Bergamo, which, if you remember, I think at that point, Bergamo or Ivrea, I think it was Bergamo was actually I forget the term, like the flashpoint, that was sort of ground zero at that point. Remember, Italy was the first place outside of China where the virus was spreading in northern Italy, and it was Bergamo that was the place, and I was supposed to play there on March 1st, so that was one of the I was supposed to go into the eye of the hurricane there, but and I remember my agent said, "Well, the gig's canceled, but we still have the hotel and everything. Did you still want to go to Bergamo just to?" I was like, "No, I think I'm good." Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
okay.
that was happening. I think I did the Vienna concert, and then I think I had one in Berlin, and then the last one was Rome on the 4th, and that was a big question mark because at that point Northern Italy had been locking down, but I guess they still did that concert. I went to Rome on the 4th, played that concert, and I think even as I was playing, like about 8 p.m. in European time in Rome, they were announcing on the Italian news that they were stopping all concerts and sporting events. So they were going into full lockdown that very night. So that was like last night where they had anything for like a while. Yeah. Wow. And so I got out the next morning. I remember they were taking everyone's temperature at the airport, and I was just trying to get out of there, like get back to New York at least. And then that's when then gradually in New York, things escalated over the next couple of weeks, but I'd already moved into almost a pretty locked down posture myself because I knew things were, I had already experienced that happening in Europe. So I just kind of came home and didn't go out again for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did that time look for you musically and creatively?
Well, the beginning of it, I was coming off this solo piano tour. So I kind of did. There were a couple good months where I had nothing better to do, and I was still on this piano energy. So I really practiced. I got a chance to practice a lot. Like do things, really delve into pieces working on stuff that I'd never really gotten a chance to work on at length with that much uninterrupted time. People, like, I think sometimes people don't really realize, uh, as a pianist, when you're on the road traveling, you really don't get much time to practice. You play every day, but your practice time is relegated to these sort of sound checks, or at least in my world, which is pretty still a fairly scrappy jazz touring world. I don't have the luxuries of some concert pianists to go somewhere and then have 3 days to practice and all this stuff. It's always in and out. What's this instrument? You're playing whatever they've got there, kind of thing. But like, I envious of like horn players and guitarists and things because they can go to their hotel room and do something. Although with horn players to the dismay of their neighbors. But but in theory, you have your instrument and you can practice it in the time off. But as a pianist, you don't. So it's kind of a luxury to have had that much time. I mean, as much as it was a terrible experience, I'm just trying to be positive about the time that I had. So it started off with that feeling where I was like, oh, I can actually really spend some time getting up every day, kind of like I did when I was a lot younger and had that much time where I wasn't expected to go anywhere or work on anything else. And then after that, I finished a couple different projects of kind of more studio related projects and stuff. So I was pretty productive over the COVID uh, period of locking down. Although it was, there were many interruptions and it was kind of fraught with all sorts of tension, obviously, as we all had. I think I've had sort of a couple recording projects and some other things happen in the last year. Yeah.
When you spoke about getting at the piano every day, I heard you say something about pieces. Is there a certain repertoire that you're working on, like non-jazz?
Yeah, I mean, I was always, what did I start doing? I was looking at these Shostakovich preludes just because I always liked those. And, it was just something that's like, oh, I have time to actually really dig into these and do it the right way. Like, so I started just working my way through those, stuff like that, just and then a lot of things, practicing other things like ways I practice on my own. But yeah, that was one. I was just like, oh, well, I had gotten a nice version of those, a copy of those that was actually Russian. So I'm not even sure what edition it was because it's all in Cyrillic, but
Right.
but the music's there, and yes, things like that. So I was like, oh, I have actually, instead of just kind of reading through them at a sound check, I was like, oh, I have time to actually dig into this stuff, and nothing else to do. Like nothing. It became increasingly clear there's nothing that else I have going on that needs to be attended to right now. So I can just kind of bear down. So I did that for a month or two. And then it was interesting. Then I stopped playing piano for a while and I kind of took up guitar. I did a lot of things over that year. And I had forgotten that I had spent like almost 2 months really shedding on piano, So when it came time later in 2020 to play piano again, I did some recordings with people and a few kind of streaming concerts. I was worried because I thought, oh, my technique's not going to be there because I haven't played in a few months. But when I went back to the piano, I was like, oh, there's things available that I didn't even know. And it was because I had spent some time actually practicing that I had subsequently totally forgotten about. It was strange. Yeah.
That's interesting. Was it a conscious decision not to play the piano, or did your day just kind of go that way that you just weren't interested after that initial couple months of being in the
hmm
shed?
Yeah, I was really dealing with piano, and then as I said, like some of these other more electronic projects started getting going that I had to finish in my studio, and that's a whole other headspace and requires its attention. So that started taking up the bulk of my day, and so I just sort of left off that heavy piano practice, and then I started just really, I can't play guitar. I'm terrible at it, but I'd always wanted to spend that time. And that was another thing, just having that much time to be a beginner on an instrument and kind of break through the initial kind of first year barriers to even being able to have any kind of expression on the instrument. So I started just, if it was time to practice in my kind of morning practice routine, I was kind of just working on guitar, and then I go in my studio or deal with like programming things or electronics and stuff. So then that kind of took over my attention for a couple months.
Now, this record's a follow-up to another solo piano record, Avenging Angel, which is a decade in past history. Did it take this time passing for you to feel that it was time to do this again? Have you been touring as a solo piano? Because you have a lot of other projects. I'm looking at here. I want to say a record I was checking out of yours was Daylight Ghosts Quartet. As a saxophonist living in a world of saxophonists that practice a lot and that are very competent, I gotta say Chris Speed is that's a voice that I really have come to appreciate. But I digress, as they say. But back to the solo piano, that's a large undertaking, you and the piano.
Yeah. When we recorded Avenging Angel, I was sort of beginning. I'd been playing solo piano concerts once or twice a year as opportunity arose over the previous few years, meaning between, say, 2004 and 2010. Just if it was an opportunity to play a gig in those days at Tonic or later at the Stone in New York, which at that point, back in the aughts, was more curated by an artist for a month, and they invited a lot of other artists to play. It's since the model of the Stone in New York has changed, where it's programmed, it's sort of more a residency of one artist, and they do for a week, and they do a lot of different groups of their own music or versions of their own music. But in the aughts, the concept was a musician curates for a month, and they actually select other musicians to play. That was the old model. And so what that engendered was often, like a few times a year, somebody would ask me, do you want to play at the Stone? I'm curating this month and I want you to do something. And then you'd pick a date and go in. And I basically used that and some other gigs. Every time somebody asked me, I just said, I'm just going to do a solo concert and improvise it. And that kind of began the development. But that was, like I said, once or twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. And then right in 2010, I had been talking to Manfred Eicher about doing something for ECM. And we were originally going to do my trio with Gerald Cleaver and Thomas Morgan. But then the scheduling got tricky with that because everybody was busy. And Manfred really wanted to record something. And I had just done my first solo tour in Europe, which was about 10 days. And he had heard about that, and he said, why don't we record a solo? So that's how Avenging Angel happened. And to answer your question, since that point, then the solo touring became something that happened frequently, like at least once or twice a year. I would do a 10-day tour in Europe and do also gigs in the States, one-off soloing. So I started playing a lot more solo concerts. So over the last 10 years, I've been doing it quite a bit, and I thought that enough had developed or changed, or it was an interesting enough shift in the way I approached that it might be worth documenting again. So that's basically the arc, is that just stuff had developed, and I thought, maybe it's time to revisit the solo performance thing. And then the question was, do I go in the studio again, as I did with Avenging Angel, or do I document the live thing? And because I'd been doing it mostly live, the kind of exception in that whole thing is actually the Avenging Angel album, which is the studio recording, because every other time I've played a solo anything, it's been live. So I thought maybe we should record a live one. And so when I saw on my calendar that the Vienna Concert House was booked, that seemed like with Manfred Eicher and ECM, the piano and the room are enormously important to him. Like, he won't record just anywhere, like he really won't. The piano's not good enough there, So I thought, Vienna Concert House, that's a relatively easy sell for him. So I thought, do you think it's worth recording this concert? And if it's good enough, maybe we can release that. And he agreed. So that's how it came together.
All right. And so that was just the one concert. This record is just documenting the one concert then?
Yeah, it's that concert in the order it was played. It's really just the concert. That wasn't necessarily the idea going in. We were going to see what happened. If it even, it could have been a terrible concert. You never know. And even how it worked, I thought maybe supplement it with some studio stuff or whatever. But originally he was going to be there. You know, he lives in Munich. I'm speaking of Manfred Eicher, producer. He lives in Munich and this was in Vienna. But, you know, COVID was kicking off all these things. So that, like, up until the last minute, they kept, the ECM people were saying, yeah, we're coming. We're going to drive there and we'll see you there. And then just the last minute, it just seemed, I mean, Manfred's 80 years old. You know, it was like uh, everything was locking down. It just didn't see, I think it was just not the right time. But the engineer, Stefano Amerio, who was the same engineer who had recorded Avenging Angel, uh, did come from Italy and recorded it. So it was documented. But um, we didn't decide any of these things, but just as it turned out, Manfred heard the recording, and I wasn't sure what he would think. And then he ended up really, really thinking it was strong as is. And then, you know, I agreed. So the result was we just kind of presented the concert in the order it was played. That's really what went down. The only thing we did was um, you know, took out applause breaks between pieces, so it made it sort of more of a through, like a complete picture of a suite and uninterrupted. So he just left applause at like the beginning and end of the concert. He left that in, but for people listening, yeah, there's no applause between, but that was a factor of kind of taking that out. Yeah.
All right. So jumping into the process, you know, big undertaking, I imagine, sitting at a piano in a concert hall and, you know, blank slate.
hmm
When you have the various pieces you're stopping, and you spoke of it as a suite, are they informing each other as they go on?
Oh yeah,
Or,
absolutely.
excuse me, as you go on through the evening?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm always just aware of things programmatically, and I really do. I encounter the evening as really the composition in the larger sense. I mean, I know I'm making individual pieces that fit into a larger work, but I'm just thinking of the experience of the whole concert, and that's what's really informing what happens next to a large extent within pieces, but also as the pieces move from one to the other. So, and I'm just trying to, yeah, I'm just thinking about what's unfolded, kind of in almost a narrative sense, but also just an aesthetic sense. So they're very much informing each other. I don't have like this tune and then some other tune. It's really like, yeah, when you say that, it really is. It's definitely an additive process in that sense. Like the first thing I play completely will be conditioning the last thing I play. You know, like that, because it's like, where have we been? What is the shape of the whole thing? And so what would be the next effective or interesting or disruptive or whatever the aesthetically needs to be? What's the next thing that I should do? At the end of it, I sort of have a sense of what that will be at some point, and then you know when it's done, and then you see what you've got. Yeah.
I was surprised to read, well, I guess I wasn't surprised, but I was just curious. You named the pieces after the fact.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, if you're in the audience at the concert hall, you're experiencing a wash of music, coming to your own conclusions, going to your own places. When you record it, you have very specific titles. And as a listener, I always try to make my own connection between title and music. Do you think that you are trying to bring the listener of the recording to your intention, or maybe not even your intention, your observation of what the music sounded like to you after the fact?
Maybe not so much that. I mean, I really the titling thing is for me more the kind of a final act of composition on those pieces, but it's I think my intention for titles is to kind of further, they're intended to be an evocation in a lot of ways. So I'm not, they're not intended to be a clue to anything, but they're, I think, set up the condition for even more of a personal experience for somebody's, for the imagination or some sort of resonance between the word and the sounds to happen, and let people do with that what they may. But they aren't. It's not. Yeah, it's not just indexing, and it's not really a clue into anything that I want something to. I don't have anything that I'm hoping anybody gets specifically out of the pieces, and that those are, clues or keys into what I'm doing, so much as it's more an invitation for more of a, for somebody to engage more with the piece and pieces and make of it what they will. I think that's really my intention with those.
Earlier, you spoke in preparing for the concert of the recording. What if it's a bad night? And going back to the process of solo concert, if you, for whatever reason, not feeling it one night, you're with a quartet, you have other people to converse with, you could defer to your colleagues, to your friends on stage. Here, you're on your own, and imagining that your level of not a great night, probably a lot of people might not be able to perceive that the way that you do. But how do you deal with that? Like, knowing the minute that you sit down, I'd rather go back to the hotel right now, but I need to finish this gig.
Yeah.
How do you get through that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of that, or almost all of that, ultimately is psychological. So I think any experienced improviser knows enough to know that is largely illusory, anyway. So you kind of have, it's an act of faith, or at least an act of trust, and sort of engage. And as improvisers, our risk tolerance is already high. I mean, that's just part of the game. So yeah, it's a feeling you have, maybe, that things aren't connecting or that the ideas aren't coming, but that's often not a reliable even idea. So for me, I just soldier on, like, it's like, just keep going. And a lot of the process of this solo piano thing like with Avenging Angel and this, was it's really a practice or a discipline. I did it in order to deal with that kind of stuff. Like how do you keep going and making a concert? And learning a lot from people who I've worked with and who've mentored me. Someone like Roscoe Mitchell is a prime example. Um, you really like he's always talked about you just kind of relax into the moment and you get an idea. And if you get it, when you get an idea, you wait until you get an idea. And then the idea comes to you and the thing you spend your energies doing is just delivering that idea. It's just a craft thing at that point. Like he always says, you just get your idea and then, okay, so now that you have an idea in your head, now just spend your time with music fundamentals, trying to bring that idea to life in that moment. And then you play that idea, you just focus on, attack, sound, the shape, all these really basic things that you can do as if you were reading somebody else's music. And then you play that idea and then you play until it's done. And then you stop that idea and then you get another idea. And you just kind of do that. And that previous idea and what happened will probably inform the next idea. And you get that idea and then you just do that one. And then it sounds kind of unromantic and clinical, but in the space of that kind of in the gaping maw of the complete uncertainty and ultimate possibility, just attending to those fundamentals kind of leads you through the span of time, and then your musical sensibility will kick in and start to decide what. Like you often get more than one idea of what to do next, and then you sort of picking what maybe is the best one aesthetically or whatever. Like this would be cool to do this one next. And it's interesting. Like Stravinsky and like his lectures, the Poetics of Music in that book, he speaks about the same thing just at the beginning of a compositional process. Of like in one of the essays, he's just talking about that sort of anxiety of having. When you start a piece, anything is possible, and there's nothing, it's just all there, and it's terrifying. It was terrifying to him, so he just started constructing a framework. He said, he takes notation paper, makes a staff, starts putting the measure lines in, and just creates a wall. As I recall, and I may be inventing this, so people who know can correct me, but I remember he kind of conjures an image of like floating in space, and then there's just sort of no direction or something. So he gives himself a room, like here's a wall, here's a floor. He's saying, now I have a space in which to create. Now I'll do something, and then you just start building in from that, and it's kind of like that. So that's really how I with my practice, I give myself some parameters to start with that I'm deciding in the moment. Like if I play 3 notes, then that's enough to start building something with, But that's how you do it. But back to your question about evaluating it, the thing is you'd never really know. So I just trust in those processes then, because what I know from a lot of experiences, there are times when you feel that everything's really clicking, I'll start with, there are times when you feel like nothing's working and you're totally disconnected and it was a terrible gig. And then if you actually document it and listen back, that can be great. You're like, actually, this was really good. And I just didn't know it at the time. And then there are times when you think everything's working, you're totally confident, and even almost cocky, like, this is great, this is totally working, and you listen back and it's terrible. So it's just, that thing is just unreliable in the moment. You just have no way of knowing, so it's better just to keep going and play.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Roscoe, for that lesson.
Yeah.
It's very deep, man. Very heavy.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, I see you have solo piano tour back in Europe. What else is on your docket?
Well, I'm going Monday. I start a tour with a trio I have with Chess Smith and Tamika Reed. That's a newish trio. We've been around for a couple of years, but we've only done a handful of gigs. And this tour was supposed to happen fall of 2020, and it's been postponed. So I'm excited to get into that. ultimately hoping to do that as a quartet with Mary Halverson if she ever has a window that it works out too. Just an idea I've had for a certain kind of modular string based, and I don't mean all, obviously there's cello, but just guitar, cello, and piano strings working, and then also having some electronics, so kind of moving from chamber to almost like it could be a chamber ensemble, just sort of a jazz group with chess on drums and the cello kind of pizzicato, and then also moving into sort of sound spaces. Then there's just there's a lot of things coming up, but there's a lot of solo touring going on. A few commissions for next year that I'm excited about getting into. One for flautist Claire Chase, who's contemporary music flautist, like MacArthur winner. She's like fantastic. So I'm getting into things like that as well, like trying to make some work for some other people to play. Yeah.
All right. Well, great speaking with you this morning. Record sounds great. All the best with it. Have a great tour.
Great. Thank you so much.
Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio. Sound by Marco Mendoza. The theme music is No FOMO, Mofo by yours truly. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.